The sound of the pen scratching the paper was the loudest noise Ethan Vancroft had ever heard. It wasn't the 7 figures he was signing away. It was the sickening realization that he was purchasing a void. He was buying silence.
He lifted his hand, the Mont Blanc pen feeling heavy, cheap, and wrong. He looked across the mahogany desk at Mr. Carlyle, his personal attorney, a man whose face was engineered for perpetual, expensive calm.
"That covers the remaining 3 families, Ethan," Carlyle said, his voice a low hum, respectful of the circumstances. "All non-disclosure agreements signed, notarized, the standard language. They understand the terms."
They mourn, they accept, they move on. A tragic accident managed with dignity.
Ethan leaned back into the leather of his high-backed chair.
The accident, 3 weeks prior, had been devastatingly quick. A foggy stretch of highway just outside the city limits. A momentary lapse of judgment. A speed that was too high. And a life. The life of a young woman named Amelia Reyes. Extinguished.
Amelia was 24. She was walking home from a late shift at the hospital kitchen. Ethan had been driving home from a late meeting where he secured a merger worth $400 million.
The disparity was vast, but in that fleeting instant, their paths had converged violently. Ethan's world was a fortress built of transactions. Money was a universal solvent. It fixed problems. It smoothed rough edges. It bought time, privacy, and, crucially, silence. The police investigation had been thorough, but inconclusive, hampered by the weather and the immediate intervention of Carlyle's team. The vehicle, a custom Bentley, was instantly removed and replaced. The insurance claims were meticulous.
The narrative supplied to the press was simple: severe fog, unavoidable tragedy.
But the real work was psychological. It was the swift, overwhelming deployment of financial cushioning to the grieving parties. The money was never framed as a payoff. It was a gesture of profound remorse, a future secured, a recognition of.
Every recipient had a specific need. The grandparents needed medical care, the brother needed tuition, the parents needed to pay off the mortgage on a crumbling house. Ethan had used his intelligence apparatus to find the pressure points.
He targeted necessity. He bought acceptance. He felt a deep, chilling sense of control. The tragedy was contained. The secret was locked away, protected by non-disclosure agreements thicker than the settlements themselves. His reputation, his future IPO, his life, all intact.
"And the last?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. He preferred questions that required quantitative answers.
"The Reyes family, Amelia's immediate next of kin. Done. They took the largest settlement, naturally. Grief is proportional to proximity, and the price reflects."
Carlyle shuffled the final stack of signed papers, placing them into a briefcase reinforced with titanium. "It's over, Ethan. You are safe. The system."
Ethan nodded, a dry metallic taste in his mouth. Safe. But the feeling was not safety, it was vacancy. He had erased the consequence, but he had also erased the reality of what he had done. He had outsourced his morality.
2 days later, the machinery of control began to stutter.
Carlyle called early, his tone for the first time lacking its usual polished smoothness. There was a fraction of tension in his voice, the slightest scrape against the smooth veneer of professionalism.
"There's an issue, Ethan, not legal." "Define issue."
One potential claimant refused the certified check, sent it back.
Ethan paused, mid-sip of coffee. He set the cup down carefully on the pristine marble counter, the sound unnervingly loud in his minimalist penthouse kitchen. Refused? On what?
"No grounds given, just returned. This is the cousin of the deceased, a woman named Clara Almas. She had a close relationship with Amelia, apparently mentored her.
She was a named party in the initial claim, a secondary loss of support claim, minor but necessary to secure the full NDA.
"What is her?" Ethan asked, moving instantly into problem-solving mode.
School teacher, public system, lives in Astoria, low liquidity, no known debts, highly involved in community service.
The profile suggests low financial dependency, but high emotional investment. She doesn't need the money, Ethan. She needs something.
Ethan felt a prickle of unease. Need was manageable. Need had a price tag. Someone who simply refused the transaction was outside the parameters of his world. They represented chaos, a variable that could not be controlled by currency.
Increase the offer, Ethan instructed immediately. Double it, triple it, make it absurd. Frame it as establishing a foundation in Amelia's name, a scholarship, whatever. Just get the...
We tried, Ethan. We approached her legal aid contact. The response was definitive. Ms. Almas is not seeking compensation. She is seeking. That was the exact.
Accountability, a word that had been edited out of Ethan's lexicon years ago.
Ethan spent the next week watching Clara Almas, not in person, but through data streams. He had her phone records, her social media ghosts, her financial history, her voting preferences. He learned she taught history to troubled high school students.
She volunteered at a legal aid clinic on weekends. She drove a dented Civic.
She was a ghost from a life he had successfully avoided, a life where actions had direct, untampered consequences, a life rooted in the inconvenient weight of principle. He discovered that Clara Almas was the only person who did not see him as Ethan Vancroft, the financier, the power player. She saw him purely as the driver of the car that killed Amelia Reyes.
This refusal, this single point of moral resistance, began to press against the flawless surface of his life. The purchased silence of the others now felt brittle, temporary. He needed to meet her. He needed to understand the mechanics of her refusal so he could dismantle them.
Carlyle advised against it. Personal contact introduces risk, Ethan. We handle this through proxies. We wait until the pressure of her environment changes her.
No, Ethan stated, looking out over the city, the millions of lights beneath him resembling circuits that he controlled. I need to gauge the threat level myself. Set up a meeting. Neutral ground. No lawyers.
Tell her it's a private discussion about the...
The meeting was arranged in a quiet, anonymous gallery cafe in Chelsea, equidistant from their respective worlds. Ethan arrived precisely on time, wearing clothing that signaled successful restraint, expensive but non-confrontational.
Clara Almas was already seated at the corner table, nursing a plain cup of black coffee. She didn't look up when he approached, only when he stood directly beside her table. She was not what he expected. Not fire, not hysteria. She was quiet. Her features were sharp, intelligent, but lined with exhaustion that seemed deeper than just lack of sleep. It was the exhaustion of carrying a weight that others had willingly dropped.
Mr. Vancroft, she said, her voice low, measured, devoid of inflection.
Miss Almas, thank you for agreeing to.
Ethan sat down. He ordered sparkling water, needing the slight physical disruption of the bubbles to ground him.
Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Clara began, looking directly into his eyes, a disarming move. I'm here because your team has been relentless. I assume you intend to make an offer I can't.
Ethan admired her directness. It was refreshing after weeks of negotiation through highly paid intermediaries. I intended to establish a substantial permanent scholarship fund in Amelia's name, managed by you if you prefer, endowed in perpetuity. It would provide opportunities Amelia never...
You mean opportunities you took away, Clara corrected, her tone still calm. I know what perpetuity means, Mr. Vancroft. It means endless money used to buy endless guilt relief. You're trying to purchase a legacy that absolves you of your...
Ethan felt a familiar spike of irritation, the annoyance of a powerful man whose solution is deemed insufficient.
This is not merely about money, Miss Almas. It is about remediation. It is about accepting the tragedy and trying to build something positive from.
It is entirely about money, she countered simply. If it were about remediation, you would have admitted to speeding. You would have submitted to the full investigation.
You would have let the truth surface instead of smothering it with lawyers and non-disclosure.
She paused, then delivered the critical blow, quiet and precise. You didn't just kill Amelia, Mr. Vancroft. You bought her silence, and then you bought the silence of everyone who loved her. You sterilized her death. You turned her value into a ledger.
Ethan felt the architecture of his controls shudder. He was used to adversaries fighting for a better price. He wasn't prepared for someone fighting for an intangible concept like dignity.
The courts determined it was an accident, Clara, he said, letting her first name fall, an attempt at engineered intimacy.
The courts determined what your lawyers instructed them to determine. The truth is much colder, isn't it? Her gaze was relentless.
The truth is, you were driving a weapon too fast for the conditions, and you were too insulated to care about the low-consequence people sharing the road with.
He was speechless. Not angry, but destabilized. She had seen the truth he tried desperately to hide, even from himself, that his wealth had bred a lethal carelessness.
If you are not seeking money, Ethan finally managed, recovering his composure, then what exactly are you?
Clara took a slow sip of her coffee. The silence that followed was deliberate, heavy.
I am seeking an answer to a single question, Ethan. What is the value of a truth that costs you? She stood up. Keep your scholarship, Mr. Vancroft. I want nothing from you. I will not be bought. I will not be quieted. The difference between you and me is that I am willing to carry this grief honestly.
You are trying to bury yours under concrete.
She walked away, leaving her half-empty coffee cup, a testament to her refusal to consume anything he might have paid for.
Ethan sat there for a long time. The waiter nervously approached, but Ethan waved him off. The cafe was full of the low clatter of plates and casual conversation, but all Ethan heard was the echo of Clara's question.
What is the value of a truth that costs you everything?
This encounter was the subtle crack in the foundation of his controlled world. He had spent his life valuing things that could be counted, traded, and leveraged. Clara Almas valued things that demanded sacrifice.
He tried to ignore her. He plunged back into the rhythm of his life, meetings, deals, flights across continents. But her refusal was a low-frequency hum he couldn't tune out.
Every time he signed a document, every time he used his influence, he felt the weight of the silence he had purchased.
The settlements with the other families, once reassuring shields, now felt like flimsy walls. He knew exactly what he was protecting, not his fortune, but the facade of his character.
He started seeking Clara out, discreetly at first. Not to threaten or bribe, but simply to observe. He found himself driving past the rundown high school where she taught. He watched her interact with her students, not with condescending pity or transactional charity, but with genuine, rigorous care. He saw her fighting for a student's scholarship, arguing with an administrator, her passion palpable and raw.
He realized, with a startling clarity that sliced through his cultivated indifference, that she was the only person who had ever truly forced him to look at himself.
She hadn't asked him to change. She had simply refused to validate his continued self-deception. She was moral gravity, and he found himself drawn to it.
The desire he began to feel for Clara was not the easy, dismissive lust he felt for the women who populated his social circles. It was profound respect, bordering on longing. He loved her conviction. He loved that she was untouchable by his power.
She was the only authentic element in his highly curated environment. He knew, instantly and terrifyingly, that if he ever wanted her respect, let alone her affection, he would have to dismantle the very identity he had spent decades constructing. One cold evening, months after their meeting, Ethan parked his car 2 blocks from Clara's modest apartment in Queens. He sat, the heating on high, watching the window of her living room. He didn't intend to approach her. He was just observing the cost of principle. But then he saw something shift.
A news report flashed across the small television screen visible through her window. It was a follow-up piece, the kind of local news item that surfaces when a story refuses to fully die, about the unanswered questions surrounding the Reyes accident.
The reporter mentioned that while settlements were reached with most family members, one close relative continues to press the issue privately, citing inconsistencies in the official accident. The camera cut to Amelia Reyes's photograph, young, vibrant, a nurse uniform visible, and then quickly cut away. Ethan watched Clara stand up, walk to the window, and stare out into the night, directly at the spot where his invisible car was parked. He felt a sudden, sharp panic, thinking she had somehow sensed his presence. He realized the pressure was building again. He had bought the silence of others, but Clara was using her own silence, her refusal to participate in the cover-up, as a lever. She was forcing the narrative open again. The internal collapse began then. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic breakdown. It was a slow erosion of his insulating layers. He realized his entire life had been a series of strategic maneuvers to avoid true vulnerability. He controlled the market, he controlled the media, and he controlled personal relationships through calculated generosity.
But he had never controlled the truth.
He looked at his phone, a device that connected him to unlimited power. He could deploy his lawyers, his PR team, his influence to crush Clara's efforts quietly. He could buy the network editor, make the story disappear completely.
But if he did that, he would lose her forever. Worse, he would lose the single chance he had been given to recognize his own soul. He loved her, not because she was kind, but because she was ethically uncompromising. She chose justice, the inconvenience, the poverty, the difficulty, over him and his easy solutions.
And in that moment, he understood the profound, tragic irony. The only way to earn the genuine love and respect of the woman who saw his truth was to sacrifice the very protection that defined his life.
The cost of his truth was everything. He drove away, not back to his penthouse, but to his unused, sterile office downtown. He sat at the large, empty desk where he had signed the non-disclosure agreements months earlier. He called Carlyle, but not to give an order. Carlyle, stop all activity regarding the Reyes case. Immediately. You are to make no further contact with Clara Almas or her legal.
Ethan, what are you doing? This is exposure. The press is sniffing around again. We need to counter them. Carlyle's professional calm was finally broken, replaced by alarm.
I know what I am doing, Ethan said, his voice quiet, calm. I'm ending the... Ending them? Does that mean you're going to let her proceed with... No, Ethan replied. He stared at the empty wall, seeing only Amelia's face, and then Clara's face layered over it. It means I'm going to end the... Carlyle was silent for a full 10 seconds, a new, terrifying sound in Ethan's universe.
Ethan, you cannot be serious. That is career suicide, financial ruin, years of prison time, potentially manslaughter charges. You were intoxicated. We covered that.
I was intoxicated, Carlyle, and I was driving too fast. I am responsible for the death of Amelia.
Ethan took a deep, steady breath. It was the first honest breath he had taken in 6 months. It felt clean, if cold.
I want you to draft a statement. It needs to be precise. A complete account of the accident, the speed, the consumption of alcohol, and the subsequent attempts at concealment.
And I need you to arrange for my surrender to the district attorney's office before...
Ethan, you have built an empire. You are destroying it over a woman who refused you. No, Ethan corrected softly. I am destroying an illusion for the chance to build a life. I am choosing the truth that costs.
The transformation was restrained, utterly contained. There was no grand gesture, no outpouring of guilt, just the clinical implementation of a moral imperative.
He had managed his concealment like a business deal. He would manage his surrender with the same cold efficiency. He spent the next few hours working, not on the statement of surrender, but on a separate document, a detailed, signed authorization granting Clara Almas full power and resources to manage the Amelia Reyes Foundation, regardless of the outcome of his legal situation. He set aside a trust,
completely separate from his estate, that Carlyle could not touch.
When the sun finally began to streak the horizon over the East River, Ethan Vancroft stepped out of his building and into a waiting unmarked sedan. Carlyle sat beside him, pale, silent, professionally devastated.
"Do you want to send the statement to Miss Almas?" Carlyle asked, holding the envelope containing the confession and the foundation documents.
Ethan looked at the envelope. He realized that this was not a bargaining chip. This was the final, irreversible action.
"No," Ethan said. "Do not send it. Let the news break through the official channels. If she hears about it, she will understand why I did." He wanted her to witness the consequence, not the transaction. He wanted her to know that her principled refusal had mattered more than his entire world. As the car pulled up to the imposing gray stone building of the DA's office, Ethan looked out the window. The city, usually a landscape he owned, now looked vast and indifferent.
He was about to lose everything, his freedom, his fortune, his reputation. But he felt a strange, terrifying weight lifted, the weight of the silence he had carried.
He stepped out of the car and into the cool morning air. He was walking toward confinement, but he felt an odd sense of release. He hadn't confessed for a lighter sentence. He had confessed for Clara.
He had confessed because he finally understood that love, true love, was not something you bought or acquired. It was something you became worthy of. And the only path to worthiness was through radical, painful truth. He knew that Clara might never forgive him, might never speak to him, but he had done the only thing that gave him a ghost of a chance. He had traded immunity for integrity. He had exchanged control for consequence. He was turning himself in for the crime of concealment, hoping that in the eyes of the one woman who mattered, he was finally earning the right to be seen, not as the buyer of silence, but as a man capable of genuine sacrifice.
He had paid the ultimate price for the truth, and in doing so, he had, for the very first time in his life, done something truly non-transactional. He had given away the cost of his world for the potential of his soul.
The value of the truth that costs you everything, he realized, is that it sets you free before they ever lock the door. Ethan Vancroft paused just before the heavy brass doors of the district attorney's building. He looked up at the sky, clearing now, turning a cold, hard blue. He was ready. But the question lingered. What happens to a man who chooses jail over freedom, not for penance, but for love? How does Clara Almas react when she realizes the man who took everything from her also gave up everything for her?
The silence is broken, but the story of redemption has just begun.
We have only just scratched the surface of how absolute power affects personal morality and what happens when the one thing you desire most cannot be purchased.
The consequences of this choice, the legal battles, and Clara's response are far more complex than you can imagine.
If you are compelled by stories of profound consequence and the psychological cost of redemption, make sure you don't miss the continuation of Ethan Vancroft's journey.
Next time, we explore the chilling realization of the consequences when wealth cannot shield you from the prison walls, and the calculated risk Clara Almas takes to redefine justice. Join us for the next chapter